Everybody, hello. My name's Scott Pinyard, and I am the head coach of This Naked Mind, and I am back again for another Coaching Questions podcast. So I have 3 questions today. These questions are about community. I'm going to just dive right in and have at them. So question number 1. Hi, Scott. So I have a question for you about community. In the intensive, I spent a lot of time thinking about drinking. And in my personal life, I've spent a lot of time thinking about drinking and how it affects my life. I've heard people talk about community and how important that is, especially early on in the process. I get that. And it has been very helpful for me. My question is this: what about long term? I've spent so much time thinking about and working on this problem. What do you think community should look like over the long haul? Should I only hang out with non-drinkers? Do I need to be continuously thinking about drinking? Would love to hear your thoughts. What a fantastic question. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. First of all, yes, particularly early on, in those stages when you're just becoming aware, when you're working to try to change your drinking habits, having community, having people around, having people you can talk to who understand what you're going through, who understand what you're dealing with, is absolutely key. It is so helpful to be able to connect with someone and hear their story, right? To hear what they went through and what they're thinking and what they felt and what happened, right? It's so amazing to be able to talk about your own, right? And talk about the way you feel and what you see happening with your life. So all of those things are 100% true and important, particularly early on. Now, longer term, a lot of us think, all right, I want to, quote unquote, get back into life, right? I want to still be able to go out with friends. I want to still be able to engage. Obviously, we can't hide from alcohol, so what do we do? And this is a really interesting question. I'm not necessarily recommending one way to do it over the other, but I do want to talk about some things that I have seen really help people be successful long term, including myself. So number 1 is I have a few alcohol-free friends. Right? These are people that also don't drink. And some of them are in my social circles here in town, right, that I go out with regularly. Some of them are people that I know online, that I've met in forums. But I have a group of friends. I have people that I talk to and connect with on a regular basis that are alcohol-free. And we don't always talk about booze, right? The entire relationship isn't based on that. But I have relationships there, so I know if I do end up having a hard time. And, over that first 6-8 months, I did. There was a lot of times when I really wanted to talk to someone who was alcohol-free. So I have that group of friends, and we do stay in contact fairly regularly. But that is not my only group of friends. As a matter of fact, a lot of these people were people I met after I quit drinking. And while those relationships are fantastic, I have a whole other group of friends who I've known for a very long time. And I have not cut ties with them at all. As a matter of fact, I will go out and hang out in bars with these people. Like, I will go to weddings and, barbecues in places where people are drinking. To your question of, do you have to not be around alcohol? Obviously, that's a personal choice. And if it is making you that uncomfortable, first I might ask you kind of what your beliefs are around it and see if we could work with it a little bit. But ultimately, that's up to you. And so for me, I've kept my drinking friends, and I hang out with them. And yes, I don't get wasted with them anymore. I don't stay at the bar with them until 2 in the morning. I don't, that sort of behavior is kind of stopped. But these people are still my friends, right? And so we still interact and we still engage. So I kind of have both, right? What I've seen people be successful with is having that sort of balance. Right? It would be very difficult to remain alcohol-free if it meant you had to give up all of your other relationships. For a lot of us, yeah, there might be 1 or 2 friends that are going too far. There might be friends that maybe don't necessarily understand what we're going through and don't really want to be around us. Also completely fine. But by and large, what I find is that people have a mixed group, right? They've got an alcohol-free clan. They've got an alcohol-free tribe that they can talk to, that they can connect with. But they also have a wider life. And just because you stopped drinking, which awesome work, by the way, just because you did that doesn't mean that, everything else in your life has to kind of revolve around it. I totally understand early on feeling like that's all you're thinking about and that's all you're going through, because that's all you're thinking about, right? It takes a lot of mental horsepower to kind of go through this process. But you're right. Over time, things do settle down. So to answer your questions directly, you can, hang out with whoever you feel comfortable hanging out with. I, have found it to be helpful to have a group of alcohol-free friends that I can connect with on a regular basis. You might find that helpful as well. Do you have to avoid people who drink? Absolutely not. 100% up to you. And do you need to continuously be thinking about drinking? No. This is the beauty of the This Naked Mind method, is because we're not relying on willpower. You get to a point where you decide, you know what, I don't want to drink anymore. And it's no different than deciding, I don't know, I don't want to drive a yellow car. Right? It's just like, okay, that's a decision I've made. I'm just going to behave around that decision. And you'll do the same thing with drinking. So you do not need to be constantly, thinking about it and constantly worrying about it. The only time when it might come up is if you start to feel tempted or start to say, wait a minute, maybe I should, or maybe it wasn't that bad, or whatever it was. If you've made a commitment to be alcohol-free, then it's time to think about it. But for the most part, like, do you need to be waking up and walking around thinking about it? No, I don't necessarily recommend that in the long term. So I hope all that was helpful. What a great question about community. I'm going to go on to question number 2. Question number 2 is, hey Scott, I have a question about talking to people. One thing that I found difficult is explaining to people what my journey has been like and how I feel, because I really don't accept the alcoholic / black or white idea of I have a problem or I don't have a problem. I hang out with people who don't drink, and they tend to understand. It's with the people who are still drinking that I'm having the issue. What can I say to them about my choice not to drink? This is a perennial question. And it's funny, so I love the fact that you threw in there that you're hanging out with people who don't drink. Because again, like, that comes in very handy. Like, people who kind of understand it or see it the way you do will be really helpful for you to kind of connect with, and maybe even talk about this very topic with, right? Ask them what they say. How do they engage? When it comes to the people, and again, these are your friends, right? This is the community that you're around. This is the the parties and the neighborhood gatherings and the family events, that we all go to, right? So what do you say about it, right? You have a bunch of options. Some of my favorites, I've always used humor, and here's why. So especially with someone who's not getting it, right? If there's someone that is just like, if you understand the fact that, alcohol use disorder is a term in the DSM-5, and that you can work to get, off of the AUD spectrum. And so you've decided to do that, and you're moving on with your life, right? For a lot of people, the mental model that we have is that you're either an alcoholic or you're not. And if you're an alcoholic, we have to not talk about alcohol around you, and you can't see alcohol and all this stuff. If you don't buy into that model, it can be tough when someone who you're talking to does, right? And so, like, think of it this way, like, I remember not soon after I quit drinking, I went, or not long after I quit drinking, I went to a family gathering, and there was someone standing there with a beer, and they saw me coming, and I saw him hide it, like, put it behind his back, and I was just like, dude, like, you don't need to do that. Now, he meant well, right? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think the people, who are asking you questions, particularly about the, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, or black and white idea, probably mean well also. It's just that they have a different model. So you've got a couple of options here, right? The first option you have is explain to them the new model, right? Talk about, hey, this is how I saw it. I read this book called This Naked Mind. Who is this? Oh, yeah. Well, in your case, I went through the intensive, which is a program for this company, This Naked Mind, and they look at it differently. And, you can have that conversation. That's always an option. Another option is just to give them a reason that doesn't have anything to do with a quote-unquote drinking problem. A lot of people do this, right? And it's perfectly fine, because you can have reasons that are absolutely true, that are just different than maybe the core reason. So things like, I gave it up for my health, or I just wasn't feeling good and I just wanted to quit, or I took a break and man, I felt a lot better, so I just kept going with it, right? There are a lot of different ways that you can kind of talk about it. Ultimately, this comes down to, do the people around you, are they going to accept you, and are they going to accept your decision? Most of the time, and I mean the vast majority of the time, when people come to me with questions and concerns about, am I going to be accepted? Like, what's it going to be like when I tell people? When I get those sort of questions, when I get those sort of comments, 99% of the time, the fears and the concerns and the thoughts and the projections of what are going to happen is like way worse than what actually happens. Most of the time, it's a minor speed bump as opposed to, driving off of a cliff. Now, when you are, having these conversations, make sure that you stand your ground, and put up boundaries if need be, right? That's another thing that I see be very effective. If there are people who are pushing you, if there are people that are making you feel uncomfortable, back off a little bit. Again, that's where it comes in really handy that you mentioned you have this group of friends that don't drink. Even if you guys got to being alcohol free through different avenues, right? Like maybe, I know you were with us in This Naked Mind, and maybe you have friends who went through AA, or you have friends who went through Smart Recovery, or any other sort of program. There's a common understanding there, right? And you can kind of have that conversation, whereas people who don't or haven't been through it don't necessarily have that. So you can address the issue head on and kind of tell them about your approach. You can say to them very specifically, here are reasons, right? Like, I wasn't feeling good, right? Where they're not saying, well, I had a problem and I couldn't quit drinking, but they're also saying, yeah, there was some stuff wrong and I didn't like it, and I quit drinking and that stopped, so I stopped, right? And then finally, there's the option to just use humor and deflect. And I'm going to defer, obviously, to you. You use these different things at different times, but the humor and deflection thing, it tends to be something that I will use, especially if someone's already drinking. If they're already a couple of drinks deep and they're asking me why I don't drink, I'll say something like, you know what, I've had the whatever. How do I say it? Shoot, I just forgot. Something like I've had all that I'm supposed to, or I've had my fair share, or something like that, right? Or I'll make some sort of other joke, about being around there, or about you don't want to see me when whatever, right? You can come up with however you want to frame it, but it's entirely possible to make to have a funny line, to have a funny one-liner, and then change the subject. And then just move the conversation on. One of the things that I've found, both in my own experience and with experience of people who've gone through our programs, this idea of trying to, have a deep conversation with someone about it while they're drinking can be kind of tricky. I'm not saying impossible, but potentially kind of tricky. So it's really kind of those three things, right? Like, explain why you view it differently and try to change their mind. Be upfront and just say, you know what, I quit. And here are some reasons why it was awesome, or I wanted to change these things and I quit drinking and so I stayed quit. I don't want to anymore. Or use humor. Those are the three tools that I see most of the time. Finally, if just telling them, hey, I didn't like where my drinking career was going, so I quit. If they're bothering you about that, or if they're, pushing you or pestering you on that, I, again, recommending disengaging there and just trying to change the subject or just kind of move on. They will get the hint, believe me. And like I said earlier, a lot of times it's our thoughts and worries and concerns about this question that are way worse than the actual event themselves. So I hope that's helpful. But yeah, great question on that. All right, last one. It's a little bit longer. So this one says, hey, Scott, something really threw me for a loop the other day. I was out and about with some friends, parents of other kids my age, and we were just having a normal afternoon shopping and enjoying our time out. Then the conversation turned to drinking. Several of the other mothers were talking about how there had been times over the last week that they don't remember how their kids got home into bed because they had been drinking. Now, these kids are in their teens, so it's not like they're dependent on their parents to tuck them in, but still, as my friends were talking about this, they were laughing. They thought it was funny. I've been alcohol-free 4 months now, and it was such a foreign idea. It makes me feel sad and isolated and alone when I hear this from my friends. I don't know what to say, so I stay quiet. What would you recommend I do in these situations? This wasn't the first time something like this has happened, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Yeah, it's so funny. Right now, and I'm speaking also, specifically, in America and other sort of Western countries that we work in right now, there it's just an alcohol dominant culture, right? The assumption is that you drink. The assumption is that you drink maybe even too much, right? And so conversations like this and jokes about hangovers and being too drunk to do something are really, really common. And a lot of those times, those jokes aren't always jokes, right? They're not always like made up fictitious stories. So conversations like this happen and people will laugh about blackouts. Um, it can be disheartening, right? Especially because for a lot of us who have gone through the alcohol-free journey, or cut back to moderation, whatever you've done, whatever change you've made in your relationship with alcohol, we've done it probably because of experiences like this, right? Probably because, like, I know personally, I can think of times when my daughter was younger, that I know that I wasn't fully present for her when she went to bed. Yeah, and that bothers me. You know what? Because she's 9 now. I'm never gonna have my 4-year-old daughter again, right? And those were times that I missed, and that bugs me. So at any rate, this tends to, with our new perspective, kind of bring up some maybe painful memories, and also make it like I don't think this is funny and don't know how to engage. So the number one thing I say is this, and this is what I do when I hang out with my drinking friends and this stuff comes up: just kind of sit back and don't say anything, right? And the conversation will go on, and it does. It moves on. One thing that I found is extremely powerful is being the quiet non-drinker in the group. I've had 3 of my friends approach me and say, "Hey, I saw you quit drinking. Like, how did you do that?" Right? And I think that the reason that that happens, at least for me, and it works with my personality, is that I'm not pushy. I'm not sitting there saying, "Well, as a non-drinker," and offering my advice. Like, I let them talk about it. We move on. And we talk about the Red Sox, right? Like, it's like that's it. So that's one thing, that I recommend. Another thing, and this I think goes without saying, but I think it's worth bringing up. Like, if you're legitimately concerned, like these kids are not being taken care of, although I doubt that's the issue, it may be worth having a conversation with some of the parents. If you're worried about that. But how I'm reading this question is more of like, everything seems to be okay. People are kind of getting through. No one's in danger, but it's just kind of awkward. And I totally, totally get that. So that's option number one, right? Is just kind of like stay quiet. This again comes back to kind of what we were talking about in the first question, which is having an alcohol-free community, right? Having an alcohol-free group of friends where you can talk about these exact things, right? Where you can have conversations about the fact that, what, we are living in modern society, but we're out of step, right? Where we don't agree on one big issue, right? Which isn't that big of an issue, and it's getting smaller every day, which is drinking alcohol, right? And so this idea of these jokes or these things being funny, whereas we see them as, scary, it's great to have a place and go and be able to talk about that, right? It's great to have a place that you can engage and you can say, you know what? You can actually, I would love it if you had a group of friends you could go ask this question to, right? This happened to me. Holy cow, has this happened to you guys, right? Connecting and getting that community will help you so much, and it will particularly help you with that feeling of isolation. You're not alone in this. I promise you, you're not the only person this has happened to. I can tell you it has personally happened to me. And so, yeah. And so I think just remembering that and maybe engaging in, these forums, or, with us here at the podcast, are great ways to kind of make sure that you don't continue to feel isolated and alone. But ultimately, that's one option. Another option is to speak up, right? And, challenge them, depending on what your friendship dynamic is. You could say, is that really good? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure how your friendship goes, but I've also seen that be effective in the past too, where you can actually start a conversation about, hey, what are we all doing here? Like, does this make sense for all of us? Right. So there's several different ways you could go. But I think the important thing, the number one thing overall, is that you're taking care of yourself. So if you find yourself feeling isolated on a regular basis, make sure you're getting out and connecting with other people who are alcohol free. And it just helps with your mindset so much, and will help you kind of see, like, all right, so I was out with these friends and they were talking about this. When we're kind of submerged in that, we tend to think this is the way the whole world is. So when you have your alcohol-free connections, you have your alcohol-free conversations, you go, oh yeah, wait a minute, there are other people out there like me. There are other people that are thinking this way, and you're gonna feel much less isolated. So I hope that's helpful. And that is it for me, folks. Thank you for hanging out with me for this 20 minutes or so. I will be back next month with some more coaching questions. In the meantime, check us out. Check out our blog. We've got a great podcast. There's a lot of resources for you over at thisnakedmind.com. And with that, I will say goodbye, and I will see you next month.
Hi, Are you looking to connect with like-minded people? Sometimes maybe you feel like, as someone who knows all this information from This Naked Mind or the alcohol experiment, that you're living in a world of muggles and people just don't speak your language. That is why I created The Exchange. The Exchange is an online community where we meet face-to-face, live video calls multiple times a week with people from all over the globe, just to connect, to have somewhere you're seen and you're heard and you feel less alone, and really that you can give back and get the support you need. So if this sounds great to you, check it out at thisnakedmind.com/exchange. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.